Hi, my name is Courtney Campbell. I am a singer, a songwriter, and a storyteller. When I was a little girl, I was really fat. Now, my name is Courtney, but my parents called me Corky. So all of the kids made fun of me at school. I'd get to school and they'd go, "Hey, Porky, Corky." I didn't like that one bit. Now, if you've ever been made fun of and you didn't like it one bit, I've written this story just for you. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Burp. Now, Burp had a hard time in school because she had a very unusual name. The first day she was in class, the teacher asked each child to stand up and say his or her name. First, a boy stood up. "Yeah, my name is Cody. Hey." Then a little girl stood up. She said, "Yeah, my name is Melissa." Burp stood up and said, "Yeah, my name is Burp." Her teacher chuckled. "That's funny, honey. But this time, tell me your real name. There's no fooling around in my classroom." Burp smiled. She looked up at her teacher and she said, "Yeah, my name is Burp." Her teacher frowned. "Young lady, if you don't tell me your real name right now, I'm going to send you to Mrs. Ferguson, the principal, and you'll be in trouble." Burp smiled. She looked up at her teacher and said, "Yeah, my name is Burp." "All right," said her teacher. "I told you. Go out of this classroom, down that hallway to Mrs. Ferguson's office." Poor Burp. She had to go down the long hallway to Mrs. Ferguson's office. She got to the door. She knocked on the door. Mrs. Ferguson opened the door. She smiled and she said, "Well, what are you doing here?" Burp said, I don't know. "Well, that's okay. Come on in. I'm sure we can figure it out." So Burp went into the office and sat down. Mrs. Ferguson sat down opposite Burp. She smiled, she leaned forward, and she said, "So, dear, tell me, what's your name?" Burp smiled and sat up and said, "Yeah, my name is Burp." Mrs. Ferguson chuckled. "Oh, that's funny, honey. But this time, tell me your real name. There's no fooling around in my office." Burp smiled, looked up at Mrs. Ferguson and said, "Yeah, my name is Burp." Mrs. Ferguson frowned. "Do you see that telephone on my desk?" Yeah." "If you don't tell me your real name right now, I'm going to pick it up and call your mother." Burp smiled. She looked up at Mrs. Ferguson and said, "Yeah, my name is Burp." She picked up the telephone. "What's your telephone number?" 274-5673. "And what's your mother's name?" Burp said, "Oh yeah, my mother's name is Shh." Mrs. Ferguson hung up the telephone. "All right," she said. "That's it." She took out a pencil. She took out a piece of paper. She said, "I'm going to write a note to your mother and father, and I would like you to give it to them this afternoon. And tomorrow morning, bring them to school to talk to me." Poor Burp. She had to take the note and go back to class. And all afternoon, the children made fun of her name. They said things like, "Hey, Burp, you twerp. Hey, Burp the slurp, yada, yada, yada." By the time she got home, she was so unhappy. Her mother looked at her and her mother said, "Oh, did you have a bad day?" Burp said, "Uh-huh. "Well, what went wrong?" said her mother. I don't know. But Burp showed her mother the note, and when her mother read the note, she said, "Oh, I see. You had a hard time with your name, didn't you?" Uh-huh. "Well, don't you worry," said her mother. "Your father and I will come with you to school tomorrow, and we will fix everything." So, the next day, Burp and her mother and her father went to school. They were in the classroom when Mrs. Ferguson came in. She walked right over to Burp's mother, stretched out her hand, shook it, and said, "How do you do? My name is Mrs. Ferguson. I'm glad you're here." How do you do, said Burp's mother. My name is Shh. Mrs. Ferguson smiled. Oh. How do you do, she said to Burp's father. My name is Mrs. Ferguson. How do you do, said Burp's father. My name is Psst. Mrs. Ferguson said, Oh. Do you mean to tell me that your name is Psst, and your name is Shh, and your name is really Burp? They said. Oh. You know, we've never had anyone in school with names like that before. We owe you an apology, Burp. Is there anything you'd like to say? Well, yeah, please don't make fun of my name because I really like it. But then a boy stood up in the back and he said, yeah, and please don't make fun of my name either. It's Pat, not Fat Pat. And then a girl stood up in the back and she said, yes, and please don't make fun of my name either. It's Corky, not Porky Corky. So, that day, everyone agreed they would not make fun of each other's names. Psst and Shh went to work. Mrs. Ferguson went back to her office. Burp sat down at her desk, and she had a wonderful day. The end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you want to find out more about me, you can go to www.courtneycampbell.com. Bye-bye.